Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Unlocking Potential. I'm your host, Gabrielle, and today we have a fascinating discussion lined up, brought to you by Baldwin Technologies. Today, we've gathered an exceptional panel of industry experts to tackle the topic of paper shortages. So we're diving deep into the lessons learned and just how we can prepare for the future. Our guests today include Tony McQuilkin, who's senior editor at Printing United, as well as Kent Tucker, vice president of Tucker Castleberry, and Julie Brannon, Director of Regional Sales at Monadnock Paper Mills. Welcome, everyone. Let's shift the conversation a little bit more towards environmental impact standards. How has that been for the paper industry? Because there's a large responsibility there in terms of environmental responsibility. Just what are some of the sustainability challenges that you've seen come up again and again?
Well, as I'm also our sustainability director at Monadnock, so I'll take that one
Oh,
first.
it's perfect. Perfect question for you.
There were some challenges, although we specifically didn't feel it so much. This is not a long enough interview to explain all the details of why, but we operate heavy counts no matter what the media is in 100% post-consumer recycled FSC certified fiber. Based on the type of work we do, we happen to buy a pulp. There's all different kinds of recycled pulp. We happen to buy one that sits at the top of the pyramid for cleanliness, length of fibers, and fewer times of being recycled, because that's necessary to hit our performance attributes in packaging. So because we're buying it up here, we felt it less than the general market that's buying the recycled pulp, for example, recycled content in the largest part of the pyramid. That's more readily available typically. But during COVID, with the shutdown of office spaces, office waste was very hard to come by. So it took months, but eventually people saw the hit of having fewer recycled fibers, for example, available. But that's just one of the many ways. I mean, now, since COVID, sustainability, I've been selling sustainable or recycled products for almost 30 years as my specialty. And I have never seen the demand or call for sustainable substrates as high as they are right now. Not even close. The closest thing I could equate it to is when FSC was brand new. You know, and a few printers became FSC certified, and then other printers were losing jobs because they couldn't compete with their. So it was this mad rush to become FSC certified back when that first started. So this is reminiscent of that, but sustainability, replacement of single-use plastics, it's all driven by the fears of global warming, the extreme weather that we're having around the world, and it's all trickling down in the supply chain crisis and being stuck in homes and isolated for 2 years, all of it accumulating together. We are seeing a much higher demand than ever measured before for sustainable substrates.
And recycled paper options, they can be a little more expensive than the average paper. So why is this the case? And do you foresee any changes in the future when it comes to that?
Well, it's funny you mention that because it's actually working in reverse right now, which is kind of the first time I've seen that. So as I mentioned, recycled's been my thing for many years. Recycled paper in the onset was more expensive because there were fewer folks out there in terms of mills able to do it. A Domtar someone mentioned, or sadly some of my larger competitors that are more so serving the commodity industry, their mills are not designed to run recycled. So if a mill is designed to run recycled, then it's an entirely different situation. The actual recycled content itself does not need to be a higher cost because now there's more competition out there around the world. In my case, it's not so much the recycled that's higher, it's the high performance attributes. Our customers are expecting fiber to do things fiber should not be able to do, that plastics usually can do. So in my world, it's a little bit different where I sit, but to answer your question, Gabrielle, what's really weird right now, pulp went up, period, whether it was virgin fiber, recycled fiber, and then it slowly recently started to come back down a little bit, but recycled fiber did not come back down, and that is because there's high demand for it and still limited supply. Anytime you're going to have high demand for something, the prices don't typically come down, just like you saw with paper last year. So do I expect that that's going to level? I do, but as long as consumers are driving for compostability or high recycled contents, then the raw materials associated with that demand are going to, probably stay level for a while.
So
I was
go
going to
ahead.
say it's interesting that you say that, because I was actually at an event just last week, and attended a panel that ended up going pretty heavily into sustainability. And one of the interesting points that they mentioned was that in the past, they would offer a sustainable option, recycled or whatever it was. But then when a customer would see the cost difference between the paper that they were used to using versus recycled, they would be like, oh, no, our old paper is fine. However, that shifted with the brands now not only demanding that the paper is recycled and are willing to eat that extra cost, but they're also requiring full chain of custody. Like, they don't just want recycled content, they want to see from where that tree first was cut down all the way through to where it's being recycled at end of life. And the major brands are starting to demand that full accountability, of which printers are a major part of it. So I think that's probably part of why that demand is remaining so high, is because the brands are not willing to compromise anymore or back down when they hear that there's a cost difference.
Yeah, they can't really afford to right now because Wall Street's getting behind it. Wall
Yeah.
Street's making it more difficult each day for businesses to secure loans if they don't have their scope 1, 2, 3 sustainability metrics in place, because they're simulating it with business profitability and sustainability, not in an environmental sense, but in a staying around sense. So that's being picked up and driven by our financial sector and by Wall Street. So I don't think it's not going to be like the past where you see it just fade away into the background. People can't afford not to now because we're responsible for our supply chain. That's how we're measured and who we're doing business with. And that's just a trickling effect all the way down.
Well, I'd also like to talk about maybe potentially the limitations and challenges that come associated with using cotton as a paper fiber source, including the impact of events. Like the 2021 Texas freeze was a big one. How does all of that factor in?
That was terrible. Frankly, but terrible. So there's cotton linter sources for North America. And then just like other things like paper from overseas, and then you can get a certain amount of it from overseas if you had to. Historically, mills that play in cotton, and we are one of them, have all relied upon domestic supply chain source for cotton linters. The freeze was one of them. Like Gabrielle mentioned, there was another major cotton fields down south caught fire last year. So basically, we had very little crop to go around. We had cotton on allocation. But all mills did cotton on allocation to varying degrees all year last year. High demand, almost no supply. We went as far as to bring some in from overseas, test that pulp. It was okay, but not at the high performance like our existing source was. So what our customers saw was a significant surcharge. Now from Europe, you would see that lined out differently, like an energy surcharge. But here in the US, there's been quite a standing surcharge. It's starting to come down, but it is still there right now because there is not enough cotton to go around for the folks looking to purchase cotton.
And it's not even cotton, it was oil too. That Texas freeze, you wouldn't think, oh, there's a freeze and the oil is, how does that impact paper? But adhesives, vinyl.
Adhesives was a big one. Glue and adhesives was all coming out of Texas. So yeah, the weather they experienced there hurt, put a major kick in the knees to a massive sector of the industry here.
Well, while we're still on the subject of sustainability, what do you know about LED UV technology and its contribution to sustainability efforts?
I don't know if
I've got some knowledge on this, but I assume Kent does. Kent, are you using LED UV there?
We are. Both of our presses are LED UV, and it's been great for us. I mean, the inks dry quicker and all that stuff, but they are definitely more environmentally friendly, less VOCs. You don't have the heating requirement that you would with conventional inks and IR dryers. So yeah, we've been really happy with the LED UV inks that we use and our lamps. But yeah, we retrofitted one of our presses actually it was back in 2020, right before COVID hit. It was in January, and it's been but yeah, it's we've been singing the praises of LED UV for a long time, and you know, we don't really sell the benefits of the sustainability of the inks probably as much as we should. But it's yeah, it's definitely from a carbon footprint standpoint, much more earth friendly than the traditional conventional inks. Between, like I said, the VOCs and the heat, and you know, the recycling of the materials that are left over.
I mean, that's a funny thing, right? When I was selling printing, I worked for a printer in the Northeast that we were the first Graco 7 certified UV facility. So we're going back to like 2005 now. But that's a funny thing, because when we made that change back then, I had the Patagonias and I was in Vermont at the time. So very conscious in regards to that. But folks went crazy about that at first, like, oh, UV, it's bad for the environment. Actually, no, UV inks are very different. They're made up of photoinitiators and polymers. So really, you can't have the VOCs because they're burned to the sheet immediately through the press. So there's really nothing to evaporate up into the air for harmful chemicals. And it's so much deeper than that anyway, because you can look at something of how recyclable is it. But there, if you guys recall, when soy-based inks were the hot jazz back in the day, well, if you looked a little bit deeper, the over-harvesting of anything that unseats the indigenous people of the area is a problem too. And there were a lot of other side baggage, if you will, that came with the soy-based inks at the time. But it's interesting because there's lots of innovation going on in our industry every day. I'm sure if they're not already, they'll be banging down Kent's door soon, because now there's some new technology out there where they're actually removing the polymers from the UV ink. There's a major cycle on right now to continue to optimize the carbon footprint, if you will, reduction of UV.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up the conversation. So thank you to Tony, Ken, and Julie for joining us on this episode of Unlocking Potential to discuss paper shortages, lessons learned, and preparing for the future. It was a pleasure to have you all on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yes.
Absolutely. And as always, if you'd like to learn more, please visit baldwintech.com and look for this podcast wherever it is you get your podcasts at. I've been your host, Gabrielle. Thanks for tuning in.